We're going to give this maybe 25 more seconds as people are coming in. I hope everybody's well. It's Friday morning, or maybe it's Friday night where you are. So hopefully, you have a little bit of space after a busy week to, to give this some thought and come along with us in looking into the Data Futures platform, something we're very excited about. We're at 99 participants. I don't know if we just leave it at that or we move in. A couple of more are still coming in. So let me do this. Let me just open with an introduction of myself. My name is Laurel Patterson. I lead our SDG integration team at UNDP, and we are the anchor for the Data Futures platform, which is in fact a collaboration across many teams at UNDP, but we're going to be walking you through it today. And we've got a great group of colleagues to give you some texture and context to what this looks like in practice. So I'm going to ask Babatunde to introduce himself, then Bhagya, and then Dumitru. Babatunde, can you introduce yourself quick?
Good morning, afternoon, evening, everyone. Babatunde Abidore, I'm in the SDG integration team as a global policy advisor. Looking forward to showing you the platform today.
Good evening, good morning, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bhagya Maheshi from Sri Lanka Country Office, and I work as the data scientist at the Citra Social Innovation Lab. And today I'll be providing you some simple, quick, and general tips when we need to look into while working with general data sets. Thank you.
Hello, good morning, good afternoon, colleagues. My name is Dumitru Vasilescu. I'm policy specialist with the UNDP office in Moldova. I will be presenting some of the key services that we've developed as UNDP for the government in Moldova, but also something that is not yet on platform, but I will try to present it today for you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. And colleagues, thanks for those of you that are popping into the chat where you're calling in from. Please continue to do that. I am joining you from New York, Babatunde from London, Bhagya from Sri Lanka, Dumitru from Moldova. So we have a range of time zones and perspectives and ideas also reflected here. So I think we'll go to the next slide and get rolling. What was our vision for creating this platform? First of all, this was something that was developed really in the midst of COVID, as we were asking ourselves a lot of fundamental questions about how we drive a just and sustainable recovery, and how we do that with a much stronger evidence base, which is something that's so critical to COVID recovery. It was critical before, but we've really seen this disruption of COVID as an opportunity to accelerate our work on data and on evidence-based policymaking globally. So the idea here, what did we want to inform through the platform? And this was the best of data across the development system, and bring that together in one single place. That involves, and Babatunde colleagues might speak to that, that involves a fair amount of data hunting and gathering to ensure that we're really optimizing data that's often kept in individual hard drives or in different countries or government ministries. And so we're doing everything that we can to ensure that we're aggregating the best stuff so that we can drive decision making. Second is in terms of empowerment, and this is a really important perspective for us. We want to ensure that you can come onto the platform, anyone can come onto the platform, and you can derive actionable insights. And this can support in a very practical, demonstrable way the decisions and choices which you may be leading yourself, which you may be seeking to influence in a particular context. You may want to elevate insights from an advocacy perspective, all of those things. We want to ensure that this is available for you any time and any place that you need it. So that's really what we're going to show you in the set of simulations that we have. Our futures modeling and other experimentation spaces let you lead. So we create the space, and to a certain extent, you create the magic. And the third part, in terms of leadership, we want this to be something that is really driving the whole of UNDP. We see ourselves, our ambition is certainly to drive best in practice across the UN system in the way that we're using data to drive policymaking. And this is really at the heart of the Next Gen UNDP ambition. I will leave it at that here. And I think at this point we turn to Babatunde, who will walk us through what the platform looks like in practice. And the idea for this session, it's a workshop, is a little bit tricky. We can't all see each other, but we do want to keep this as practical and informal as possible. So please pop questions, into the Q&A as you go, any comments that you have. We're going to be sharing some email addresses with you so you can ask us questions afterwards. This is truly an integrative and interactive space. So we really want to hear from you, even if it's not today, if you're going to think about it over the weekend, but come back to us and let's keep this discussion going. So Babatunde, over to you.
Thanks, Laurel, and good to have everyone here. So the platform that Laura just introduced us to is what we're calling UNDP, the Data Features Platform, and it's data.undp.org. And the platform is currently structured in two ways. Right? The first is bringing data together, as Laura mentioned, and then the other is generating different level of insights. Right? So what I'll walk us through today is just a short introduction to what that looks like and how it is. So the bringing data together and under different pillars as a form of economic response is, the data and information are categorized under these 5 pillars that UN has, right? So the health first, the protecting people, economic recovery, macro response, and social cohesion. And each of these pillars we worked with within UNDP across different thematic areas to be able to understand the pillars and the areas that will be important to understand each of those, right? So for instance, under the economic recovery, for instance, right, we're trying to look at issues around vulnerable businesses and community groups, right? Looking at immediate support to businesses and communities, and also investment into the future. So here, based on this, you can be able to start to see different information that can help at a global or country level to understand that aspect. There is also the different policy measures that countries put in place during COVID as part of recovery. So your cash assistance, your waiving of your reducing fees, and being able to map those different policy scenarios, right, by country. Then in addition to that, we also have the different level of insights, right? So having data by those 5 pillars, but we also have the insights. So in terms of the insights, what we've been able to do with that is to try and tell a story of recovery or COVID impact, right? We have how countries are investing in recovery through our Green Recovery Tracker. There's a data and insight from UN 75 work that has been done. There's different insights on school closure and some of the other ones that we're going to talk about later today. There is a gender policy tracker that was carried out by the colleagues in the gender team, and then the temporary basic income and others that we'll be able to talk about. So for now, I'm going to pass it back to Laura so that she can take us through the deep dive on the SDGs. Thank you.
Babatunde, thanks. And we'll keep this as fast as we can so that you get a good overview within the course of the hour. I want to point out to you all that in the polling that was just been done, when we asked the question, how do you normally use data in your work? The majority response is around writing reports and knowledge products. And what's up there, but not to the same degree, is using this to develop new strategies. And what we think is really important here is that we're using data for the future that we want to see. We're using data to think through futures options. And we often find that we're using data to justify or report backwards on what we've already done. And so what I want to show you is a study which we have anchored on data futures. All of the data is accessible to you and helps you think about the way that COVID could impact development trajectories in your countries. You can look regionally, you can look globally to 2030, and importantly, from our perspective, we've run the scenario analysis to 2050. And so when you come into this space, and you can see here, it is same as Babatunde was presenting on the data.undp.org platform, and you go to a special space which we set up for this particular study. We've created a series of scenarios on how COVID could impact development trajectories. A COVID baseline, a COVID trend of how we think, which would generally follow a sort of a middle ground of recovery, a high damage scenario where the economic damage is maybe worse than we anticipated now, recovery is protracted and so on. We have a no COVID baseline from 2019, and then a series of interventions, which we've called the SDG push scenario, which, as you can see here, actually exceed in terms of poverty eradication. They exceed where the world would have been even before COVID, and that's taking COVID impact into account. So what we want to be able to do with this is not be blindly hopeful or just sort of saying we can do it, world, just pull it together, but say, no, what would it take? What does it look like? What are the specific measures, in what proportion, at what scale, in what combination, that could start to make the difference in terms of recovering from COVID, but really building forward and reimagining the possibility of different development trajectories. And so we frame this around 48 parameters, and you can come in and take a look at what we mean by all of this. So it's very interactive for you, and it's roughly framed around 4 main areas: around governance, digital, green economy, and social protection. And our hypothesis here is that these kinds of choices and investments seem to have a very significant impact on recovery and development trajectories for countries at global level. But you might say, well, that probably might not play out the same way in my context, and you'd probably be right. So what we've done is made this searchable by any country in the world against a series of different indicators. I may lose my screen here now as well too, so that you can start to look exactly at what the implications would be. You can download the data yourself. You can download the images so that you can start to put this into presentations, share this on social media, and start a discussion. The other thing that came back a little bit low on the poll that we just did with you all was using data for advocacy. So again, this would be something we want to ensure that you can ask the questions that are most important to you. And now I'm a little bit scared to flip through the various indicators in case my screen goes blank again. But you can search here a set of indicators, and here for different regions and for countries specifically, and you can build a set of visualizations that are important for specific contexts. So we have a publication coming out soon, which we would love to have your thoughts on and share with you as soon as it's launched, that's taking a deeper look into this SDG push scenario, into its potential, and specifically how that plays out in different country contexts. And for us, what's most important here is to say, how does this play out with countries which were already at the lower end of human development before COVID? And what are the ways in which COVID is especially and disproportionately impacting most vulnerable in those settings? Is the SDG push scenario valuable? We found that it is. In fact, it's disproportionately valuable in those settings, and we'll have some new research on that to share with you soon, and accessible for you to use and access here within the next couple of weeks. So let me stop here, and then over to Dimitri.
Thank you very much, Laurel. I hope you can hear me. Indeed, I would like to thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to present our work in Moldova and what was already done in terms of showcasing the key services for our government and for people that are already available on the global platform, on the global dashboard. So I will project that for the audience. That's to show what is already available. Let's call it the top of the iceberg, also because we are currently working on a set of new services that we would like to then make public. I would like to start by mentioning that many of the things are not yet visible. There is a data collaborative platform established by UNDP Moldova that is using multiple layers and multiple sets of data, including big data, sick data, statistics of various type that is triangulated, that is used to produce some of these services. Now the COVID, I think it essentially accelerated, let's say, the efforts both in government and UNDP to produce and make use of what is available, but also generate some new data. On the data.undp.org/country/Moldova, you can find some of the services that are already available for the general public. You can also access the methodologies. You can access also, let's say, some of the data sets. There is, as I mentioned, one of the services developed during the lockdown together with the European Space Agency, and this is just an example for you. Use the service on the impact of COVID on air quality in Moldova and Ukraine. It was a collaborative with the office in Ukraine. You can look at the let's say at the levels of air pollution since 2017, essentially up until summer of last year. This is something that we did again with the European Space Agency. Then you have two big streams of services around let's say the socioeconomic impact of COVID on households, most vulnerable groups. There are 7 groups that you can access here, but also on the economic sectors, and in particular on the SMEs. Just to give you an example, there is a service line here on the impact of COVID on households. You can see that, for instance, and you can navigate yourself throughout this data. What are the priorities and what are the 3 main concerns for vulnerable groups during the pandemic? You can see indeed the personal health being on top, but also other aspects around food supply, food safety, and water supply and safety. There are many then aspects related, for instance, to the changes in income. This is based on an assessment that made use of data coming from the Statistics Bureau, from the household budget surveys, but also from several other additional inputs, including an ad hoc module, COVID ad hoc module to household budget survey. And please do navigate. You can also download the full analysis here and make best use of it. When it comes to businesses, there is a service, let's say, developed based on a large sample of MSMEs from different sectors. Again, you can see, for instance, you can navigate through the major challenges faced by companies, the impact produced, and some of the mitigation measures that companies are implementing. All of it, it's probably a bit yet static. We are working with colleagues on making it more dynamic, to have it really as a living platform also for Moldova and for the government. I would like also to mention again that there are some new services that we are working on. I will briefly try to showcase just maybe one example of such a service. As I mentioned, we made use throughout this COVID period also of the big data coming from telecom. There is a service that we developed for government. It is used throughout this whole crisis period, and uses mobility data and some other data sets. We've developed this for government. It is called stay-at-home indicator. We believe, we think it will be soon also available on the global platform. This specific indicator, as an example, it gives a possibility to understand what is the percentage of people staying in their home districts, not leaving their home districts during daytime or nighttime, and it is being used by our government to monitor, let's say, the situation, but also to develop some possible options of how to reduce, minimize the risks. There is also related to this, there is a risk map that we are developing and improving, let's say, the algorithm, its precision, its quality, let's say, for a risk map that is to support the government in assessing the risks of the spread of the COVID. It takes into consideration mobility data, but also electricity consumption data. And I think, again, these services will be made also publicly available. Now, we just made, in the last 2 minutes, briefly about the lessons learned. The platform and the collaboration with the global team, I think it is a proof of the fact that data probably becomes a new type of a currency for UNDP, and essentially the services and our products is let's say represent a new generation type of products for the governments and the people. We are, through this platform and the services that we are developing, we are enhancing or enriching the capability of the government in making use of what exists and making use of the new services. But we also believe it is an exceptionally good opportunity to develop new partnerships. I mentioned the ones with telecom, the electricity distribution companies, with the European Space Agency, and many other partners that are working with us. And last but not least, I would like to mention that many of the works done together also with the team in New York, brought us to a phase in which we are starting to work with the government around an intelligence unit, a sort of a platform and a space that is to support with actionable intelligence, to support the government with actionable intelligence around COVID response, but also recovery efforts. Thank you very much. Over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Dumitru, thank you so much. Fantastic. And there's a number of questions that are already rolling in. Keep them coming, colleagues, and we'll come to them at the end as a collective. What I'd like to do, so we've given you a sense of ambition and scope of the platform. Dumitru has given an excellent case study in its application at the country level. We've told you a little bit about futures, right, and thinking about data differently. And at this point, I'd also like Babatunde to come in and give you a sense of the way that we are also building this platform from the perspective of simulations. And what we're focused on is simulations on some of the core challenge areas that we also think you will be able to pick up, interact with, search and use for the country in which you're operating, and then use that to support. It could be a report, it could be a strategy, this could be advocacy, it could be decision making in your particular context. In addition to the simulations, we want to show you some other data sets that we have and that we host on the platform from UN 75, so that you also get a sense of perception related data. We're showing you all of this before we bring in Bhagya to be able to say, we want this to be a multidimensional space where you can really think through what would make the case in my context. Is it a simulation on a particular issue that provides specific assets? Or maybe it's the opinion of my population compared against populations in neighboring countries and their views on a particular issue that could really start to drive change in development trajectories and in choices that are being made. So I just want to give a little opportunity for you to interact with both the simulations and the UN 75 data with Babatunde, and then Bhagya, we're going to come over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. 1 second while I share my screen here. Before I go into the simulation for temporary basic income, I wanted to also show quickly the possibility of using the data features platform to be able to start to overlay information, right? So here, for instance, I'm showing under the protect people the option of looking at, say, for instance, the Human Development Index that UNDP generates, right, and start to see how that maps out globally, and then be able to combine it with some other information, right? So, for instance, if I want to see countries with a Human Development Indicator and the rural population total, for instance, is what I'm looking at here. And here you can be able to start to see different levels of correlation. So countries with high, higher Human Development Indicators with countries with higher rural population, for instance, and start to make sense of that and be able to use that kind of analysis to start to start policy conversation at the national level. And there, with this, you can also overlay different information on COVID cases, number of deaths, fatality rates, school closure, and the rest. So that's one area that this can help us with. The other that we wanted to show you today is the temporary basic income that UNDP talked about last year, and it's a way of starting to think of options of social protection or options of recovery, right? There are different approaches to temporary basic income and different discussions around social protection, and temporary basic income provides one way of looking at it. Right? So there are 3 methodologies here that you can be able to look at, the top-up, half-media, and uniform aspect of it, and then how many beneficiaries in terms of extreme poverty level, in terms of $5.50 a day for countries, in terms of $13 a day for the ECA and Latin American countries, and start to see by country what that looks like. Right? So the temporary basic income costs by country. Here we have Congo, for instance, the population, the number of beneficiaries, potential beneficiaries, the monthly cost per percentage of the country GDP, for instance. And as you look at those different national level information and be able to see per beneficiary number, for instance. So if countries introduce temporary basic income with the approach of top-up, the monthly per beneficiary cost is $93, and that will vary by country. And here you can interact with the data and also be able to see in detail what that looks like. There's also the link to the report that was published in the UNDP that you can be able to see what's in the report and then come back here to interact with the data by country and be able to see for your particular country what the different temporary basic income idea will be. So you can switch the approach from top-up to half-median to uniform, right? And you can see the monthly costs depending on how you're thinking of it, either by per beneficiary or total per country, and start to see, be able to start a conversation at a national level on being able to have those kind of policies in place. Thanks, and I'll hand over this now. Thank you.
Baggy, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurel. Before we start, Janine, can we share the screen with the slides, please? Greetings to you all. So I'll start while this screen is sharing. We are in the era of data, and we create a huge amount of data and consume them within few seconds every day. Also, with the global pandemic situation, we experience the need of having timely, quality, reliable, accurate, and meaningful data and the insights coming out of them. So on the next few minutes, I will briefly discuss about 3 broader aspects and few general tips under each in relation to analyzing and interpreting data. The first aspect I want to discuss is understanding data. We need to know the demographics and the technicalities of the data set we are going to work. Data is normally found as raw data or processed data set. There is no point of reinventing the wheel if the pre-processed data set serves our purpose and we can rely on that. COVID-19 dataset compiled by the Johns Hopkins University is a very good example. It is readily available and regularly updating. So rather than collecting data from different sources and combining it, we all started using that data set and build our models, analysis on top of that. Hence, my first tip for the day is reuse and rebuild. Then when we start working with data, we see that there are so many existing caveats. If we take a time series data set, for example, there can be situations where there are no data for some years. Then we have to think of ways of filling these caveats or imputation methods such as flat imputation, interpolation, extrapolation before we start working on it, or evaluate whether we can keep these caveats and get a meaningful output from the data set. Therefore, my second tip is understand the existing caveats in the data set. There are certain occasions that we have to combine data from few different sources to get a meaningful output. For example, a comparative analysis we did on COVID-19 response, we used the John Hopkins dataset as well as the dataset published by the Sri Lankan National Epidemiology Unit. The main consideration was whether the dataset are complementing or competing with each other. Regardless the fact that they are competing or complementing, we should pay attention whether the integration provides a meaningful output. Methodologies are compatible and the integration can be well explained. At a larger scale, we have to consider what are the data integration techniques such as ETL or EII or EDR to use in. Hence, be mindful when combining data from multiple sources. And nothing to elaborate further. Always rely on trustworthy sources of data. This simply means that we need to look for data with clear methodologies and coming from credible institutions or sources, such as the platform that shared earlier, the SDG Global Dataset or the OECD Dataset, etc. The next tip I want to give is understand the velocity, variety, and volume of data. So this is mostly applicable for big data or data coming from non-traditional sources. Unless we understand these 3 V's of the data set, it is very difficult to design the desired output. Understanding 3 V's will enable you to better utilize technologies such as Hadoop or Spark when working with the data set. Let's now discuss about analyzing and processing data. When it comes to analyzing and processing data, my first tip is to combine qualitative and quantitative data to create meaningful insights. On the comparative analysis on COVID response we did, we used quantitative data to cluster country groupings, where qualitative data to compare on measures taken on containment and mitigation, communication, and institution and coordination. This then helped us to filter out best practices that can be applicable at the national level, as well as complement or identify outstanding measures taken by the country. What I meant by simple versus complex is that we have to carefully select the analyzing method. There can be cases, a meaningful interpretation crucial for decision making can be supported using a simple method, whereas at certain cases, having a complex methodology is required. In the comparative analysis on COVID-19 response, the clusters were formed based on similar timeframes as Sri Lanka's first and the second cases, as well as total number of cases and deaths reported as per the day, which was a quite simple clustering logic. The next tip on data processing is learn the basics and continue to grow while working on it. There are numerous technologies out there that you can use to process data. On my early stages of career, I started learning the very basics of R. I hope you have heard the statistical language. And then I started slowly expanding my horizons on it while working. And also sometimes working with data sets manually is tricky. From data entry to clean to analyze, it is efficient and effective when the workflows are automated. This minimizes the human error. Hence, automate the data processing pipelines as much as you can. With this, I would like to move to the last tip of this aspect, which is maintaining proper documentation. Documenting our methodology as well as commented scripts allows another party to recreate or rebuild on our work. So make sure that you maintain easily accessible documentation. The third and the last aspect of this discussion is communicating data. It is very important to clearly communicate the messages coming from data to create an impact. In general, people love to hear stories. On a blog series on existing disparities in Sri Lankan education system, we used a persona-based stories to showcase the transitions between different school categories, which was quite effective. Therefore, incorporate storytelling techniques in communicating the messages. A picture speaks more than 1,000 words, and we all have heard this. In recent years, there's a tendency to use more and more infographics to convey key messages. However, overloading the infographic will ruin the message. On the education blog series we use a map to show the disparities at the district level, containing a small icon representing the concept and the numerical value to quantify it, which was simple and informative at the same time. Therefore, use simple and informative data visualizations when communicating your findings. People love interactivity and get excited with the interactive digital platforms. Hence, it would be great if we can present our findings through interactive graphs, charts, and platforms. For example, the platform we see earlier, as well as the SDG progress platform provided by UNESCAP, accompany a web platform. The report accompany a web platform having regional and sub-regional graphs that depicts the progress or the disparities among the countries or the regions. Some people find it difficult to digest the numbers or tables. Therefore, it would be ideal to convey the meaning of the number rather than number itself. For example, rather than saying there's a 1.89 gap in modern ICT dimension in organization X according to the serve-call model, we can say there's a higher gap in the perception and the actual service reception of the customers for the usage of modern ICT in organization X according to the serve-call model. Finally, make sure that you credit or acknowledge the original sources, producers of data and visualizations. This will ensure credibility of the work that we are presenting. With this, I'm concluding the tips on analyzing and interpreting data and hope you all find it useful. Thank you, and back to you, Laura.
Bhagya, thank you so much. And I think this is really hopefully something that helps colleagues think about the ways that you can access and use some of the basic skills and capabilities and parameters so that you can make the most of data and evidence in the work that you do. So we're going to move to the Q&A at this point. We have a number of questions already here, and feel free to keep asking, and we'll do as much as we can to answer them in the next 25 minutes or so. So Babatunde, I'm going to ask the first question over to you, and it comes from Shamimi. So thank you for that, which is about how the data finds its way onto the platform in the first place. So who and how does the data arrive on Data Futures platform? How is this developed? And do all countries, are they under any obligation to disclose their data? Over to you, Babatunde.
Yeah, thanks, Shamimi. And I see a similar question from Lillian also, asking on how often the data is updated on the platform. Those are very useful, important questions. In terms of how often the data is updated, a lot of the data are updated real time, but the way we have the data structured now, there are some of it that we're working on making sure that that are not fully real time yet, and we're working on how to make those real time. And by the next couple of weeks, those should be. The reason why they are not real time now is because we have to take those data and make some analysis on them and combine them with other data sets. As I showed earlier with some of those correlations that you can see. There's also the access of data aspect where we need to restructure, format the data before we make it available. So that's that aspect of it. We're able to pull a lot of the data from different organizations, and all those organizations are accredited on the platform. So we're pulling data from WHO, pulling data from the World Bank, some data within UNDP, and UNICEF and other organizations like that. And the goal is to be able to have a space where all those data come together and we can start to make sense of them, right? So not just looking at health data alone, but there's fundamental structure or information in the country that can help me explain the COVID vulnerabilities or the impact on health or the social protection or recovery plans that exist. So those that kind of data have been brought together that way. In terms of if all countries must disclose their data. No, even though the UNDP will work with countries at different levels to be able to get the data that they might have and make it accessible for policy making. There is the option of working with governments and making those data offline if required. And we're doing some of that now with the work that we're doing on vaccine equity and hyper-local information that we're trying to support countries on. Thanks.
Today, since you're on, let me continue with another question. Maybe you can answer this specifically in reference to the TBI simulation that you had walked through earlier. And it's a question from Tarun, which is about, I think what you had meant, Tarun, is how we process quantitative data into qualitative insights, actionable insights. So how does that work? And how are we ensuring that we're using trusted sources? And then it's a question maybe for related to that, you could answer perhaps with the UN 75 data in terms of whether we're analyzing also data and insights from media in order to support the actual insights on the platform. So could I ask you for that, Babtuni, and then Dimitri, there's a couple of questions for you I'm going to pose next.
Yeah, thanks, Tarun. So it's always combining qualitative data and quantitative data is, as we know, is critical for informed decision making, right? Because the qualitative information tells us, some stories of what happens at the national level, but we also need the context. We also need those backgrounds, right? And where we're trying to get to is a point where all of those information can be seen in one space, right? And we're, at the national level, those are easier to do, and we're trying to create that. And in some of those, in some of the visualization that I showed earlier, we're also starting that, right? So, for instance, bringing the policy response to COVID information that exists at the national level and be able to map it with COVID impact, right? A number of deaths, a number of cases at the national level. So there's those kind of data can be presented in different formats, and we've tried to do that as much as we can now. But going forward, there's a lot of mixed methods, way of triangulating information that will be required, right? And that's it to make it effective for policy-making decisions. So that's how we're doing it for now. If you look at the data at undp.org/UN75, that's where, for instance, we brought different data from that the UN75 group collected, and be able to present it and be able to see how people are responding to different global issues, how the data and information from that at the national level can be able to map to how people perceive those different areas. And there is the peer reports data. There is a data that was collected from Facebook and WhatsApp that's also brought together, and the information from Heatherman and the rest. And I know there might be some colleagues that were involved in doing that survey here, but it's a good way of bringing those qualitative and quantitative information also together. Thanks.
Babtuni, thank you. Dimitri, there's a question for you in the chat about accessibility of the data that you presented and how to access it on the platform. So I'm going to leave that to you. The other question I thought might be interesting from your perspective to answer is around dealing with censorship and data gaps and creative ways perhaps to overcome that in different development settings. So over to you, Dimitri.
Thank you, Laurel. As I mentioned, we are putting on and making publicly available some of the services. On some others, we will be working with the team to make them available together with the data sets. I can mention, for instance, also because it was just discussed, some qualitative data. We had a very interesting exercise, and actually not just in Moldova, but we know about similar examples in other countries in which sick data was collected throughout COVID. in an attempt to understand the perceptions of people around the impact of COVID on their communities, households, and so on. So, for instance, that data set is anonymized, is fully anonymized, irreversibly anonymized, and will be also made public. Our mobility data, again, the data sets with which we worked were irreversibly anonymized, and we believe that under some conditions we can provide access to it for those interested to work with us, let's say on some new services, or just to access data, for the research purposes. On the other hand, I think when to the question on availability of data, indeed, in our case, in our specific case, as I mentioned, the COVID was a trigger probably to start using something that we never used before. We went into using more the electricity consumption data. I think there was also in the chat a question on it, and I tried to my best to answer it. We use those electricity consumption data to monitor the spread of the COVID. There is a service that we worked on that combines, let's say, an experimental service indeed that combines electricity consumption with mobility, and we've seen. And again, access was possible because of our local collaboration with the telecom and electricity distribution companies. I mean, the service actually, it's very experimental, but it provided us with some very interesting insights around the spread of the COVID since March of 2020, right? And how we've seen some interesting patterns of an evolution of the mobility and electricity consumption. We've seen in areas in which electricity consumption was going up, mobility going down. Those areas were actually the areas with lower risks of COVID spread, and that was something that very interesting, I think, that we've learned. Thank you. Over to you.
Thank you very much, Dimitri. So Bagya, I have two related questions for you, and then Babatunde, I'm going to come to you next on some of the questions around SDG target measurement at country level. And Dimitri, you may have thoughts on that as well too from the work in Moldova, but that's coming to you next, Babatunde. So that's your 2 or 3 minute warning. Bagya, the questions for you, one from Francesca, which was about any tips for beginners, and you've provided some of them, but maybe you want to give us an example from the perspective of Sri Lanka. You have an energetic advocate that's looking to, bolster their messaging and their influence through their messaging with data. And they are looking to get into this data space, into data and analytics. What would your suggestions be for them on how they can get started? Over to you.
Thank you, Laurel. I think all the tips that I provided in the presentation is mostly like targeting on the beginners. And if I have to prioritize on all the 15 tips that I provided, I'd say the way I started was like build on basics and learn while working on it. So coming from a background of engineering, and then the data was like something new for me also. And I'm just sharing my own experience to elaborate on like how I navigate myself through a beginner and come this far. So learning the basics is the key. So it can be on how to design the data systems, and then understanding the data, the domains, and then the methodologies out there. And then when it comes to analyzing part of it, you need to familiarize yourself with like different the languages or the packages out there. So it's basically, if we can learn the basic building blocks on the different aspects, and then build on top of that, that would be the ideal case for the beginners. And then one thing I would love to elaborate also is keep yourself updated with the technologies out there. So the technology is fast moving. So you have to keep up with the pace, and then learn like every day, like practice yourself, and then keep with the pace to make sure that you are utilizing the latest technologies. So then in a way, it's help you to provide more meaningful outcomes, and then the modern ways of disseminating data, or like communicating data, or analyzing data. So I think those two would be the top two that you have to look into, like you build on your basics and then work on it, plus like keep up with the pace of technology and like keep updating yourself. Over to you, Laura. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I think we've provided, or we will be providing some of the email addresses in the chat. So if you have questions, or you find you get a little stuck as you're navigating the platform, reach out to us. And we want to be able to support you to solve that and use the data effectively. So there's one other way that we can support and keep you energized and encouraged, keep working in this space. So for Babatunde, a more specific question about using data to measure the achievement of the SDGs at a national level. This was a question from Mohammed. Is there a dashboard? Mohammed, there's probably too many dashboards measuring these things, but I'm going to hand over to Babatunde. If you like, Babatunde, and then Dimitri, I might ask you the same thing. There was a related question about how do businesses measure their impact on various SDGs. And again, there is a lot of work that's being advanced with the private sector in terms of their contribution to SDGs individually and overall 2030 agenda. So Dimitri, you might have an example of what that looks like in the Moldova context. But let's first, Babatunde, give you an opportunity to speak to measurement of SDG achievement at the national level. Over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed. Mohammed, that's a very important question. And as Laura said, there's a lot of dashboards out there that tries to track our SDG achievement and targets. I think the main one that I'll refer you to is the UN statistic, right? So there's the official one is the UN stats.un.org, and you can have a look at be able to search for that. And in there has information on all the SDG indicators and progress over time. And the way most of those data are collected is from all the different UN agencies that are responsible for each of those SDGs, right? So for instance, UNDP, we're responsible for SDGs on multidimensional poverty index, some aspect of poverty, some aspect of gender, right? And also SDG on governance, for instance. And we're going to have soon on our site a story on achievement based on the ones that we're responsible for, and also be able to pull the ones that are UN agencies are also responsible for. And we have different elements of that in terms of electricity mapping, for instance, in terms of fossil fuels, subsidies, and all those other things, targets in the SDGs, and that you can also see already on the platform that we have. But that's you see in the chat, there's many of them, and we'll be happy to point you to that. Thanks.
Thanks, Babatunde. Dimitri, would you like to come in?
Yes, thank you, Laura. I have maybe two examples so that to make it a bit more practical. I think you mentioned, this topic of contribution of private sector to SDGs. I think one example and indeed those are context specific, but in our case is the fact that companies, as I mentioned in telecom, for instance, they've been contributing to SDGs by providing access to anonymized data. I think it's also it can be considered, it should be considered also as a contribution, because we were able then to use this data for development. The example is for Moldova is we were able, through accessing the mobility data, we were able to estimate some of the SDG indicators. An example is on the access to transportation. I believe it's SDG 11.2.1, and that was estimated, let's say, for several areas of interest, several municipalities in the country, and that is one example. A second example indeed is around using SIG data, another typology, let's say, of data. We've collected through micronarratives, collected stories from the private sector around their contribution to specific SDGs. It is a very interesting exercise through which, let's say, we are generating some insights and some intelligence essentially on two things. One is around the areas of opportunity and what are those areas for private sector, and what are the areas in which we can further engage with companies, to accelerate that contribution towards SDGs in the country here. But also another interesting area is that based on the micro-narratives, we are running sense-making workshops using a specific methodology and some software, let's say, to make sense of data essentially, and to think in terms of what would be the solutions to accelerate contribution of the private sector companies to sustainable development. I hope that helps, and happy to share the data sets, more details on the methodology, and so on. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me put we're coming to the end of our time, so I want to put a final question to the whole group, maybe one of two final questions. And this is from Vanessa, so thanks. And she's asking, what resources or literature would you recommend for people or organizations that really don't have a lot of knowledge about data processing or around data analysis, and they want to have an easy introduction, a non-intimidating introduction to the subject? Any thoughts from the three of you? Maybe Babatunde, Bagya, and then Dumitru, in that order?
I cannot say one literature right now, but I think for me, it's the first step is to try and understand what you want the data to do, right? So if I want to build a culture of data analytics, what are the policy issues and the things that I'm trying to target that to? So if it's poverty alleviation, if it's some aspect of development, and then based on that, start to see what kind of information and analytics exist in those areas, and start to pull that together in order to be able to build that kind of infrastructure. Thanks.
Bagya, what do you think?
Yeah, I also agree with what Babatunde said. Like, it's a very tricky question to answer. There's no single literature that we can say that you have to refer to this if you want to start over. So first you have to look into your data and then see what you want to get out of it. And then you start looking into what other people have done thus far to make sure that the way you want to drive your actions or the strategies are in the right direction. So I would say first understand what you want to do from the data. That is crucial. And then start looking into the literature. And basically, if that goes to learning part of it, then there's a lot of materials out there that you can learn on, online courses, and there are printed books and courses also out there. So if that learning part, then there's resources too, but for the implementation or practical part, you first need to understand what you want to do with the data. Over to you.
Thank you so much. Dumitru.
Thank you. Just to complement colleagues, I think it's indeed very important to understand what are the needs and what are the problems, and definitely another important aspect is to define, let's say, the use cases, to think in terms of how you would like to transform data into some information, and then information into some intelligence, actionable intelligence. And indeed, there is a lot of things that we are learning by doing and learning throughout the process. And I think that's equally relevant. Many of the services, or some of the services that we've presented, I mentioned it, were quite experimental. So we went into areas in which there is only some attempt somewhere. And I believe it's that is why this type of webinars, this type of discussions are relevant, because you can connect easier to colleagues doing similar things or trying to do similar things elsewhere. Thank you, Laura. Over to you.
Dumitru, thanks. I want to hop in here for a second, and then Babatunde gets the last word today. And we're almost out of time, and we have one more polling question for you. I mean, to this, I would add, see yourselves as investigative journalists. Ask a lot of questions. Ask questions not only about the data, ask questions about who's asking those questions, who's answering, where is power being held in that conversation, and how do we empower communities whose information we are gathering to be the owners and users of that information towards the choices that are going to have the most impact for their lives in their communities. So I think there's no right or wrong way to get involved. I think Babatunde, Bagya, and Dumitru have given a lot of ideas. But in every case, what we're saying is start with the challenges, start with the issues, start with what you're curious about, and then work through the data that's available, the analysis that you see. And in this way, I'll just encourage you one more time, do connect with us in Data Futures, because this is exactly how we envisage this space, and you'll have our support to be able to navigate that.